Maybe he's leaving, she told herself. Jason was beginning to breathe normally again when it struck them. Freddy was ducking down again, this time silently. His eyes had gone dark, but as soon as they spotted him, his gaze lit up again, illuminating the room. Marla and Jason scrambled around the metal chairs as fast as they could without touching them. They crawled across the thin carpet between tables until they came across an opening in the chairs and crawled under the table beside Lamar. Marla and Lamar looked at each other. At a loss, Freddy was straightened up again and began to circle around to the third table. We have to run for the door, Marla whispered. Lamar nodded, then motioned for them to follow his lead. He watched, waiting until Freddy was bending down once again, and then gestured to the middle table. They caught their breath, trying not to gasp, and Lamar looked toward the door. Could they make it? Marla put a hand on Jason's shoulder and he started to shrug her off. But she was gripping him tightly, her fingers digging into him. He moved to brush her away, then looked at her. She was terrified, even more than she was. He held her. He let her hold on to him, like while keeping his eyes on Freddy, waiting for the next opening. It didn't come. As they waited, poised for flight, Freddy turned away, his deliberate steps taking him to the doorway. The room went dark, and Jason's heart skipped before he understood what had happened. The lights were gone because Freddy was gone. Mother, he whispered, his voice little more than a breath of air. He's gone. Marla looked at him and nodded, but she did not let go of his shoulder. Are you okay? She asked in the same, almost soundless way. He nodded, then pointed to his leg and shrugged. Theoretically, she smiled at him and took her hand from his shoulder to muster his hair. Suddenly, Lamar was tapping Marla's arm. He pointed to his ear and she gave him a puzzled look. Jason stiffened, realizing what it was. And in a second, Marla did too. There was music in the room. A teeny Libra sounded like a music box. The gaps between the notes just a little too long. The room lit up again, a drowning red, and before they could move, the table was wrenched away. Freddy stood over them. He shoved the table aside, almost hurling it. They screamed, not a scream for help, but the last futile act of defiance. Jason clung to his sister, and as she pulled his head down against her, shielding his eyes so he would not have to see. Suddenly, Freddy stumbled off balance and lurched to the side. He tried to right himself, but another jolt from behind sent him flying forward, falling face first into the tables. Marla, Lamar, and Jason looked up to see Charlie and John, their faces flushed with effort. Come on, Charlie said. Let's go. Dave shrugged out of his buns quickly. The knots were sturdy, but the cords had not too much to give. A few twists and turns, and he was free. He crawled to the door on hands and knees and held his ear to the crack, careful not to jostle the door and give himself away. The loudspeaker blared, and then the sound he had been waiting for, footsteps running away. He waited just until the sound faded, then got purposefully to his feet. Where are we going? Marla panted as they raced back toward the main dining room. The office, Charlie called. It's got a real door. We can barricade ourselves in. She glanced at John, who nodded shortly. What they would do once they were barricaded inside was another question. But they could worry about that once they were safe. They ran through the dining room. Charlie glanced at the stage, blurred and passing, but she saw what she knew what she would. It was empty. They reached the narrow hall that led to the office, and Charlie's heart lifted when she saw the door. Light shining from its small window like a beacon. Wait, light? She slowed her pace. They were 10 feet from the door. She lifted a hand, signaling the others to stop, and they approached the door slowly. Stealing herself, Charlie grabbed the knob and turned it. It was locked. She looked helplessly at the others. Someone's in there. Jason whispered, moving closer to Marla. There's no one else here, Marla said softly, but it sounded like a question. Charlie was about to try the door again, but stopped herself. Don't draw their attention. He got loose, Jessica said, her voice hoarse, and Charlie felt a chill. She's right. She didn't say it. We have to go back, she said, without waiting for a response. She turned, pushing it between Lamar and John to take the lead. She took 2 steps forward, then stopped dead as she heard the others gasp. It was Chica, her eyes like burning orange headlights. She stood at the other end of the short hall, blocking their only way out. Her body filled the space. They could not even try to run past her. Charlie glanced behind her, even though she knew there was no other way out. Before she could react, John was running at the animatronic. He had no weapons, but he hurled himself toward the thing and leaped up, trying to grab a hold of her neck. He caught her briefly, struggling to hold on as Chica thrashed her head back and forth. Chica bent forward and swung to the side, slamming John into the wall and John let go, crumbling to the floor. The cupcake on Chica's plush snapped its mouth as if it was laughing, its eyes rolling in their tiny sockets. John! Charlie cried as she thrust the flashlight back for someone else to take. She felt its weight leave her hands, but she didn't look back to see who took it. She looked up. There was an electrical cord dangling above their heads. Parts of the rubber had worn away, exposing stretches of bare wire. Chica was slowly advancing. Charlie jumped up, but she couldn't get it high enough to reach it. She looked to either side. Is it narrow enough? She glanced at Chica. She was moving slowly with measured steps. They were trapped, and she did not need to hurry. Charlie planted one foot against the wall, then stretched her legs across the narrow hallway and did the same on the other side. Walls to climb. She inched upward, her legs shaking with the effort. She looked up, struggling to retain her balance as she reached for the cord, careful to touch only the rubber. She closed her fingers around it and it dropped to the ground. Chica lunged forward, her arms extended and her teeth contorted in a mechanical smile. Charlie sprang up, the electrical cord brandished in front of her, and she shoved it into the space between Chica's head and her torso. Chica jerked backward, sparks flying, and for a horrible moment, Charlie did not move. Her hand throbbed with the electrical current, and then she was caught there, unable to make her hand let go of the wire. She stared down at it, willing her fingers to open. Is this how I die? Lamar grabbed her and pulled her away, and she looked up at him. Why died? The others were already running. Chica was deactivated, or so it appeared. Slumped forward, her eyes dark. Lamar gave her arm a tug, and they took off after the others. With a pleased smile, Dave watched the confrontation through the window in the office door. Just a matter of time now, he thought. The girl had been clever climbing the walls like that, but she had almost killed herself. They could not last much longer. All he had to do was wait. Suddenly, the room was lit with an ethereal blue. He froze, then slowly turned. Bonnie. The animatronic towered over him, close enough to touch. Dave fell back against the door and screamed. There was a scream from the direction of the office. The group paused for a moment and looked nervously at one another. It doesn't matter, Charlie said. Come on. She took a quick look back at Chica, who was still slumped forward in her. Charlie led them into the main dining room as they emerged. There was a sudden movement. Foxy was there. He leaped onto a table in front of them, looking among them until his several eyes lit on Jason. He crouched as if he were about to jump on the boy. And Charlie grabbed a napkin dispenser and threw it as hard as he could. It struck Foxy's head, glancing off with little effort, but it was enough to get his attention. He turned to her and pounced. Charlie was already running, racing to lure him away from the others. Then what? She thought as she ran furiously out of the dining room and down the hall. The arcade. It was dark. There were things to hide behind. She kept running, following until she reached the door. Then it turned so fast she almost fell, hoping to give Foxy a moment's disorientation. She looked around frantically. There was a row of arcade machines at the back of the room, set out just a little from the wall. She heard footsteps behind her and dove for it. The space between was so tight she could barely squeeze herself into it. Her sides were pressed between the consoles and the wall, and there were thick, cold cords beneath her feet. She took a step back, moving deeper into the crawl space, but her foot slipped in the cable and she barely kept from falling. Movement in the room caught her eye, and she saw a flash of silver light. He sees me. Charlie dropped to her hands and knees. She crawled backwards, screaming inch by inch. Her foot caught on the cable and she stopped to free it, twisting into an impossible position to quietly dislodge it. She moved back further and then her foot bumped into another wall and she stopped. She was closed in on 3 times and almost felt safe. She closed her eyes for a moment. Nothing here is safe. There was an awful sound, a clash of metal hitting metal, and the console at the far end of the road rocked on its foundation, banging back against the wall. Foxy leaned over it, and now Charlie could see him as he smashed the display, spilling shards of plastic onto the floor. His hook caught on something inside the machine, and he yanked it out again, trailing bits of wire. He moved on to the next game, smashing the screen and throwing the console against the wall with a casual brutality. Charlie felt the impact of it echoing through the wall as he moved closer. I have to get out. I have to. But there's no way out. Now that she was sitting in one place, she realized that her arm was stiff with pain, and only now did she look at it. The bandage was soaked through with blood. The wall beside her was streaked with a line of it where her arm had pressed. She wanted to cry suddenly. Her whole body ached. The wound in her arm, the constant tension of the last day or so, who could tell how long had it been, was draining her, taking all she had. The next console crashed against the wall and Charlie flinched. It was only 2 away. He was almost to her. She could hear his gears working, humming, grinding, and sometimes screeching. She closed her eyes, but she could still see him, his matted fur, the metal bones showing through the searing silver eyes. The console beside her was wrenched away and tumbled to the ground like it weighed nothing at all. The cords beneath Charlie's hands and knees showed forward with it, and she slipped, grabbing at nothing and trying to regain her balance. She caught herself and looked up just in time to see the downward swing of a hook. She moved faster than she could think. She hurled herself at the final console with all her strength, and it balanced precariously, then fell, knocking Foxy to the ground and trapping him. Charlie started to run, but his hook shot out and snared her leg, cutting into her. She screamed, falling to the ground. She picked at him with her other foot, but his hook was stuck deep in her leg. Every time he jerked back, she felt the impact. She kicked him in the face, and his hook tore free, slicing open her leg. She screamed again, instinctively grabbing the wound, and then Foxy was on top of her, snapping his jaws and clawing her as he tried to free his legs from under the console. She fought back, struggling to get away. His hook slashed at her again and again as she tried to block the blows, screaming for help. Suddenly, John was there. He stood over Foxy and stomped down hard on the creature's neck, holding his foot there. Foxy fled out but could not reach him. Charlie, get up, he called. Charlie just stared at him for a second, too shaken to register the question. He stamped his foot on Fox's neck repeatedly, and then, in one quick movement, he grabbed Charlie's hand, heaved her up, and started to run, pulling her along behind him. They made it to the main dining room, where the rest of the group was huddled in the middle of the room. Relieved, Charlie rushed to join them. She could tell she was limping, but she did not feel any pain, which she realized somewhere dimly in the back of her mind was not good. When they got to the others, her heart sank. Their faces were grim. Lamar was holding the flashlight out in front of him, but aroused in his trembling grip. Marla gestured quickly to the entrances. Freddy stood in the hall to the storage room, while Bonnie now blocked the hallway to the office. Chica, animated, stood on the stage, looming over them. Charlie glanced back the way they had come. Foxy was approaching. He had freed himself. He stopped in the doorway as if waiting for a signal. There was no escape. Suddenly, acutely aware of everything around her, Charlie noticed the sound of a music box, as if she had come, unconsciously, then been hearing it all along. She took a deep breath. The movement seemed to go on forever. It had come to this. They were trapped. They waited. Now, perhaps, for the animatronics, there was no hurry. Shirley cast her eyes around, futile for a weapon, but there was only party hats and paper plates. As one, the animatronics started their approach. Shirley grabbed the back of a metal folding chair, not sure how she could even use it. The animals were moving faster now, coming in a unison, as if this battle were a choreographed dance. Mother took Jason's hand and whimpered something in his ear. Whatever it was, he shook his head, set his jaw, and balled his hands into a fist. Lamar glanced at him for a moment but said nothing. Jessica had her hands stiffly at her sides, and she was murmuring something to herself inaudibly. The animals were almost on top of them. Freddy's trying to walk was predatory, and the music box notes were coming from Freddy's direction, from inside Freddy. She now realized she could leap from the stage and took small bouncing steps toward them as if excited but holding herself back. Bonnie's big paw-like feet slapped the ground like a challenge, and Foxy slunk forth with a malevolent grace, his eyes fixed on Charlie as if she were the only thing he saw. She gazed into his silver eyes. They filled her vision, crowding out everything else until the world was silver. The world was Foxy's eyes, and there was nothing left of her. John squeezed her hand. It broke the spell. She looked at him. Her vision still cloudy. Charlie, he said haughtily. Charlotte. Shh, she said. Later, he nodded, accepting the lie that there had been a later. Foxy crouched in again, and Charlie let go of John, her heart pounding as she braced for it. Foxy's joints shifted in their sockets as he prepared to spring, then he stopped. Charlie waited. There was no screams from behind her, no sounds of fighting. Even the music box was silent. Foxy was motionless, though his eyes still glowed. Charlie looked around, and then she saw. It was Freddy, not the one they all knew, not the one who stood less than a foot away from Marla, his mouth open as if poised to bite. It was the other one, the one that she remembered, the other Freddy from the diner, the costume her father used to wear. It was looking at them, staring from the corner, and now she heard something. It was indistinct, just whispers in her head, a gentle susurrus, blowing through her cautious mind without taking hold. She looked at the others, and they heard it too. It was inevitable, but the meaning was unmistakable. Carlton was the one to say it. Michael? The sounds they heard grew warm, an unspoken confirmation, and together they approached the Golden Bear. Mother brushed past Brown Freddy as if he were not there, and Charlie turned her back to Foxy, unafraid. There was only one thought in her mind. Michael, it's you. They were almost to him. All Charlie wanted to do was fling her arms around him, hold him close, and to be again the little girl she was so long ago, to embrace him again. This beloved child who had been read from their lives in a carefree afternoon to do it all over, and this time to rescue him, this time to save his life. Michael, she whispered. The yellow bear stood motionless. Unlike the others, there seemed to be nothing inside of it. It stood of its own accord to its own will. There was nothing to hold the costume, jaw closed, and his eyes were empty. Suddenly aware that their box were to the other animatronics. Charlie startled and turned, apprehensive. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy stood at rest, almost as if they were back in their stages. Their eyes were locked on Charlie, but they had halted their approach. It's the kids, Colton whispered. Foxy wasn't attacking Jason. Molly gasped. Foxy was trying to protect him. John took hesitant steps toward the middle of the dining room, then approached more bodily, looking at each of the robots in turn. It's the kids, he echoed. All of them. Their faces were no longer animalistic, no longer lifeless, as if some spirit inhabited them. Suddenly there was a crash from the sealed exit door. They all startled, turned as one as the wall beside the roaded entrance shook with the force of a dozen blows. Now what? Charlie thought. The bricks broke and fell, shattering into pieces across the floor, dust filling the air and rusty clouds. A figure stepped through the hole wielding a massive sledgehammer, and as the air slowly cleared, they saw who it was, Clay Burke, Colton's father. His eyes set on Colton, and he dropped the hammer and ran to his son, sweeping him into an embrace. Clay stroked his hair, gripping him like he could never let go. Charlie watched from her distance, relieved, touched by a stiletto edge of envy. Dad, I'm gonna puke, Colton murmured. Clay laughed but leaned back when he saw that Colton wasn't kidding. Colton bent over, hands on his knees, fighting the urge to retch, and Clay's face took an alarm. Colton straightened. I'm good. Clay was not listening anymore. He was looking around the room, at the animals. All of them were frozen in time, displaced. Okay, kids, Clay said, his voice low and his words careful. I think it's time for us to go. He started toward the exit he had made. They glanced at one another. The whispers were gone. Wherever he had been, the yellow Freddy was slashed again, an empty suit, though no one had seen him move. Charlie nodded toward Clay, and the rest started forward, heading almost reluctantly to the hole in the wall. Charlie hung back. John stayed beside her, but she gestured him forward, taking up the rear. She had barely had time to take a step when something took a hold of her throat. Charlie tried to cry out, but her windpipe was being crushed. She was whipped around as she weighed nothing, and she found herself face to face with the yellow rabbit. Dave's eyes were shining through triumphant. He had his arm around her neck, squeezing her so tightly that she could scarcely breathe. He held her so close and was almost in an embrace. She could smell the costume, stained fur and years of picture sweat, blood, and cruelty. He spoke, still staring at Charlie. You are staying. Absolutely not, Clay said, taking on the group's authority. Dave dug his fingers deep into Charlie's neck, and she made a strangled sound. I'll kill this one right here while you watch unless you do as I say, he said, and his voice was almost pleasant. Clay looked at him for a long moment, calculating, then nodded. Okay, he said, his voice calm. Well, we'll do as you say. What do you want? Good, Dave said. He relaxed his grip on Charlie's neck, and she took a shaky breath. Clay began to move toward them, and the others followed. Charlie looked up at the man in the rabbit suit, and he met her gaze. It was you. You killed Michael. You killed Sammy. You took them from me. His eyes should have held something fierce and dangerous. They should have been windows to the rotten core inside, but they were only eyes, flat and empty. Charlie plunged her hands into the gap beneath the costume's head. Dave drew back, but she held on. If you want to be one of them, then be one of them. She shouted, and she tripped the spring locks. Dave's eyes widened, and then he screamed. Charlie jerked her hands free, barely evading the locks as they snapped open and plunged into his neck. She took a step back, watching as Dave crumbled to the ground, still screaming as the costume released. Part by part, the animatronic insides pierced his flesh, ripping up his organs, tearing through his body as if it were not even there. At some point, he stopped screaming, but He still writhed in the floor for what felt like long minutes before he was still. Charlie stared, breathing hard as if she had been running. The form on the ground now seemed unreal. Jean was the first to move. He came beside her, but still staring down. She waved him off before he could touch her. She could not bear if he did. Jessica gasped, and they all looked up. The animatronics were moving. The group drew back, huddling together, but none of the animals were looking at them. One by one, they took hold of the broken body on the floor and began to drag it away toward the hall to Pirate's Cove. As they disappeared down the hallway, Charlie noticed that the yellow Freddy was gone. "Let's go," she said quietly. Clayburg nodded, and they filed out of the restaurant for the last time.